Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. This is so creepy, and I can't believe I'm about to tell you this, but I also think I'm probably not the only one who's had this happen. I had a dream the other day about someone I have never actually met. Like, I've never been in the same room with them. I've never had a real conversation with them. And yet, I know more about their life on the day-to-day than some of my closest friends. And this dream, if you're like, what happened in this dream? I was in this person's house. She is a fitness influencer. I could picture her house. Her husband was there. Her kids were there. We were having a party. Of course, it was a dream. So, like the bouncy house was 4 times the size of the house. We didn't have enough air for it. I don't know what the metaphor is in my dreams about that. Somebody analyze that and let me know. But I woke up and it was just not shocking, but it was a real kind of reality check moment that I could picture her house with that much detail. I could picture her family with that much detail. And I've never met her before. That's why today on the podcast, we're talking about parasocial relationships. This is a topic I promised to create an episode about multiple times. And today we are diving in. Honestly, I think this is one of the best episodes I've ever put together. Just going to pat myself on the back. I'm so excited to hear from everybody about this episode. So let's dive in. When I'm talking about parasocial relationships, you know what I'm talking about, right? They are those one-sided relationships that we have with people who feel like friends, except they have no idea we exist. And if you're thinking, no, I don't have any of those, not me, then let me ask you this. Have you ever felt worried about someone's breakup announcement on Instagram? Maybe a celebrity. Have you ever gotten excited about a YouTuber's newest vlog? Like, I'm thinking of a travel YouTuber, but it could really be anything. And they've been on this extended trip where you get all these vlog segments every time they're in a new city, or maybe it's a day by day. I'm impressed by that. And you can't wait for the next installment. Or maybe you found yourself in a conversation with somebody, like an actual conversation. You're talking to somebody and you're saying, yeah. Actually, that happened to my friend. Or maybe instead of that happened to you, you're like, my friend told me about, but it's not actually your friend. It's that person that you follow on TikTok or Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, wherever they are. Those are all parasocial relationships. Now, these parasocial relationships, and this is a term that was coined back in the 1950s by American sociologists Donald Horton and Richard Wohl to describe how people were connected with TV personalities at the time. And they are basically emotional bonds we form with people we've never met. Now, these are unique because they are one-sided connections where individuals develop a deep sense of intimacy and familiarity with someone they don't know. And we can develop these with people such as media personalities, celebrities, influencers, podcast hosts, streamers. And well, in some sense, parasocial relationships have been around a very long time. We'll get to that in a minute. Social media has really taken them to a new level. Like, think about it. We're not just watching celebrities on TV anymore. We are walking through influencers' homes with them as they move through their morning routine. We're seeing them open their cabinets, their drawers, their pantry. We are following van life YouTubers across the country. We are seeing where they shower, where they sleep, the ways that they store their clothes, what they use as a bathroom. Very intimate details. We're watching streamers eat dinner and chit-chat about their day. We are get ready with me with your favorite content creator. We're sitting in their bathroom. They're in their bathrobe. Maybe their partner or roommate or spouse walks behind them. You know what their name is. You know who they are. Maybe you feel like you're part of a podcast host's inner circle. And that last one, yes, I do see the irony there. And actually, I want to talk about that because I come at this issue from both sides. Like every podcast episode I write, I think about you. Yes, you. You specifically. Every time I turn on the microphone, I imagine what you are doing right now while you are listening and how you might be reacting to what I'm saying. You know, are you putting away your dishes in your kitchen? Are you driving in your car? Do you have one AirPod in while you're walking? And as I just mentioned this to you, are you looking over your shoulder? Are you turning off the episode? Like that's its own kind of parasocial relationship. Because I am thinking about you every time I create this content. But I'm also on the other side, right? I follow creators. I watch stories. I get invested in people's lives of people I don't know in person. People that if I walk down the street and yelled their name, they would have no idea who I am. Similar to interactions I've had with all of you, please come say hi to me. I've mentioned that before, but I have met people who listen to the podcast, and it's always that acknowledgement of you have no idea who I am, but I know so much about you. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, can I have your name? Tell me a little bit about yourself, right? Because I want to catch up. I love meeting people in person, but that doesn't mean we don't need to acknowledge that this all started because of a parasocial relationship. And when I get into thinking about it too much, like it really just bends my mind how much I know about people who wouldn't recognize me and how much, honestly, you know about me, even though we've never met before. Now, specific to podcasts, I do want to call out that I actually have an interesting episode about this. It's episode 104 with Sharon Walters. It's called Getting Less Passive and More Active on Podcasts and Social Media. And I do talk about how most people who create podcasts don't have a big enough audience that they probably wouldn't respond to you. And in fact, they would love to hear from you. They would love to develop real connections, right? That's why a lot of people get out here and talk about something they're passionate about because they want somebody else to talk about it with. So go listen to episode 104 and I'll stop rambling about my unique situation here. Let's move on. Let's talk about why this matters. Like, here's why we need to talk about this. There is recent research, I'll tag it in the show notes, showing that 51% of Americans have parasocial relationships. And when I first heard that stat, I had this moment of like, that seems kind of low, but I guess generationally, there are some people who are too young, although that's its own place. That's its own rabbit hole we could think about. What age do people start developing these relationships? But then there are also people who just really aren't on social media, maybe older generations. Like, sure, 51. I think I saw another stat that said 59%. The thing I find more interesting is that research shows that only 16% of people actually acknowledge that they are in parasocial relationships. That's crazy to me. And at the end of the day, you know, I see endless commentary from people about spending less time on your phones. A lot of talk about like dopamine addiction, right? And endless scrolling and things like that. But something I often find missing is like, we're not talking about why we are often so drawn to our phones. Is it that they currently hold a huge piece of our connection? Is it because it's comfortable and it's easy, right? I just open a button and I can check in on all sorts of people. And when I'm done, I just shut it down. But how is this affecting our real life friendships? And that is what we're diving into today. Now, to understand where we are now, we need to look at how we got here. So I said that these parasocial relationships have been around for a really long time. And in my research, what I found that was my first kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, is that before all this technology, before phones and TV and things like that, the closest thing we had to parasocial relationships was between readers and authors. Like, let's think about that. People would read Jane Austen and feel like they know some part of her. They see patterns, they see things that she seems drawn towards. But they might get 1, maybe 2 books a year from their favorite author. Now, we're getting multiple daily updates from dozens of people that we feel connected to. And how did we get here? So let's break this down. Let's keep moving forward in the timeline. We had this old school version, probably around the time when our favorite sociologists, Donald Horton and Richard Wohl, were coming up with the term parasocial relationships. We had the version of this where you would catch your favorite TV host for 30 minutes a night. Or maybe you would read about a celebrity in a monthly magazine. Maybe you would watch interviews when a movie star had a new movie coming out, right? And they were doing that press tour. But I do think something to note is that at that time, you were probably seeing a lot of their carefully curated public appearance. That's it. That's all you got. Maybe you got some sort of exclusive, right? Vogue or GQ or whatever magazine back in the day, like went to their house and photographed them in it. Still probably curated. Now, I do think that everything has changed when social media showed up, right? Suddenly, we have this kind of behind the scenes access. And a lot of times, real-time updates. People are giving us multiple updates a day on where they're going, what they're doing, who they're seeing, right? They're tagging each other. There's even times where we aren't even maybe at an event, but multiple influencers or YouTubers are at that event together, and you can go watch all the different perspectives of the same thing and kind of piece it together. Then you add in this ability to comment and DM. And I do think that can create some real conversation with people, right? Some real connection. There are definitely people in my DMs that I recognize their name or in their comments. At this point, certain people I've met up with on Zoom. Like, I'm not saying we can't break the walls of the parasocial relationship, but I think that's fewer and far between than most people. Like, most people are just watching. And then we can even add layers, right? We have like live streams from people who are just in their bedroom or eating dinner, like I mentioned before, getting ready with me, people who are popping on live multiple times a day, bringing you into events where you can comment. And maybe they're doing a live, I'm thinking of an influencer I follow. She did a live where she was just sitting in her living room in her pajamas for, I think, like 2 hours. People would comment and she'd respond back. And so you do have some dialogue there, but it's still like, unless somebody has their username on them, if they walk up to me, I may not know who they are. And at the end of the day, I think all of this has created this feeling where it feels like we are getting personal updates from a friend. And what's really making it different is that intimacy level. We're not just seeing that polished version anymore, right? It's not the Vogue photo shoot where everything's perfect, but you're in that celebrity's home in the 1950s. We are now walking through people's homes. I mean, I mentioned this in the beginning, right? I can perfectly picture that fitness influencer's house, and I've never met her. I don't even know if I've commented on anything. I don't think I've ever DM'd her, but I can walk through her house, at least kind of the main floor. I have some sense of how that is. I can perfectly picture her living room and her kitchen, that's for sure. I know what her husband looks like, what her kids look like, her mom, her other family members. I have some sense of her morning coffee routine and big life moments. Now, she doesn't do this, but, like even some people sleep on live streams, right? There are all sorts of crazy parasocial relationships happening on the internet. And I do think, as somebody who posts content on the internet, right, there are ways I talk to try and draw people in. I'm not even going to lie about that, right? I say that I'm talking to you versus if I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but it's something somebody told me in the very beginning of podcasting. If you're like, to everybody listening, it reminds you that it's not just the two of us. And they tell you, right? Like the podcast courses and gurus and people tell you like, no, just use you. It's the same thing as when people get on a live and are like, hey, how are you doing today? And you can respond with a comment. Or when someone gets on there just to tell people like, hey, I'm so thankful for you. You guys are some of my closest people. Everybody's really good at developing parasocial relationships at this point. But there's one other piece we need to acknowledge, that like the platforms, they are designed to create these feelings. They want to make you feel connected to the people you're watching, to make you feel like you're part of someone's inner circle. And they're really, really good at it. So now that we understand how we got here, let's talk about what this is actually doing to us. Because like most things in life, it's not as simple as good or bad. Like in all my research, I think I kind of thought that parasocial relationships probably leaned more towards that not great for you. But like most things involving human connection, it's complicated. So let me break down what I found in my research and which pieces of it surprised me. So let's start with some of the positive sides. And the first one is stigma reduction. Like, think about this. Someone with anxiety sees a creator talking openly about their mental health journey. And suddenly they don't feel so alone. They see someone who looks like they have it all together, admitting to the same struggles they're facing. And that can be powerful. Or perhaps behavioral modeling. You know how they say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? Well, when you can't find someone in your immediate circle who's making the changes you want to make, whether that's in your career, health, finances, these parasocial relationships can show you that's possible. And yes, I hope that's part of what you get from our time together. I hope that that is truly some of the positive of this parasocial relationship at the end of the day, right, is that you see friendship, community, connection is possible. Then there is community formation. And this one is huge because imagine being the only LGBTQ person in a small conservative town, or someone with a super rare medical condition. Or perhaps you're a person with a really unique interest that no one around you shares. And if you find the right parasocial connection, it can lead you to find your people, right? Somebody who gets it, somebody who makes you feel less alone in your experience, somebody who makes you feel safe or seen or provides you with really vital information, right? I've talked about my struggles with chronic illness recently. I have definitely developed parasocial relationships with people where I have learned all sorts of things about the conditions I'm working through. And even if it started with me following someone that I've never met, that research was valuable. Now, here's something that I found really interesting. Again, another research study shows that people actually rate their parasocial relationships as more effective at fulfilling certain emotional needs than their relationships with casual connections. Like, let's let that sink in for a while. Because when I think about it, I'm not surprised. I do think most people probably feel like people they've never met are more effective at fulfilling certain emotional needs. Now, the flip side, because there's always a flip side. I've talked about this on my social media, but I don't know if I've talked about it here on the podcast, but something that I have talked about on my social media is this idea that the more connections you have, the more intense the emotional investment can be. And by that, I mean, when you have a decent number of people in your circle, they don't have to be your closest friends. They could be acquaintances. When something happens in their life that maybe is positive, right? They wrote a book, or they ran a marathon, or they bought a house, or they achieved a financial goal, right? That can be exciting. That's a high, hopefully. But there's also plenty of lows. Like when you have more people in your life, you have more people who could get in an accident or get a health condition or go through a financial hardship, lose a loved one. And when that happens, you're just balancing more of this up and down of emotions that aren't necessarily impacting your life, but you still care about these people. And so what happens is when we develop all these parasocial relationships, we end up with even more people that we care about. And I'll use myself as an example. When Kobe Bryant died, I was genuinely distraught. I have never met him, never been in the same room with him. But when I heard about how he passed away and the work he had done and the family he left behind, I cried. Like there was a real emotional impact from someone I didn't even know. And it's like we're on the flip side. I'm not trying to say that an emotional investment in somebody is bad. What I am trying to say is if we have a lot of parasocial relationships and we're expending a lot of emotional energy here, do we have leftover reserves for the people in our lives that we actually care about? That's my question. I don't have an answer. It's my question. Now, the next thing on the flip side is that there's this kind of like relationship distortion, right? These connections can be just simple entertainment. They could turn into a trusted resource. And as we go on, we might start to have expectations of these people who don't even know that we exist. And we might feel betrayed when they make choices we don't agree with. Like we can take their life decisions personally. Something I have seen is this commentary out there about relatability. The Les Alfred, she is the host of the She's So Lucky podcast, previously the Balanced Black Girl podcast. She's done a few episodes on this recently about this idea of relatability. And right, people start to have expectations if a huge piece is like your life is showing this like messy family or your relationship or whatever. If you buy a bigger house or you hire a house cleaner or you downsize your house or you get divorced, right? People start to get this whole like, well, you're not relatable anymore with their parasocial relationships. It's like, I don't know. Was I supposed to stay in a box for all these people I didn't even know? Another thing that's really interesting is, if you think of my Wheel of Connection framework, which I talk about in depth in episode 100, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I've never included parasocial relationships in it. But after doing all the research for this episode, I'm thinking like, I think that might need to be in there because we are giving so much space to these relationships in our lives, potentially. Like they're taking up emotional bandwidth. And I think we need to start considering how they fit. We are definitely developing some form of roots with these people, right? We know details about them. We have like memories of experiences they've had. We identify with shared interests. It's kind of a wild thing to think about. And now that brings us to something that we really need to talk about, which is how these relationships are affecting our real world connections. So let's start off by talking about why these parasocial relationships are so appealing. And I think it's pretty simple, actually. They're just easy. I want to compare this to if you want to call a friend. And I just talked about this in episode 127. We did a whole episode on calling your friends. But, if you're going to call your friend, some thoughts might run through your mind. Like, are they busy? Am I bothering them? It's been a long day. Like, what if they don't feel up to talking right now? A lot of work, a lot of thoughts. But now let's compare that to connecting with someone through social media, right? Pick up your phone, unlock it, click on an app that you probably don't even think you're clicking on because we're all just so automated and trained to do it. Start scrolling, instant connection. I don't have any questions. I don't have any thoughts. No scheduling is required. No emotional labor is needed. And no guilt if I get distracted doing something else. That person who was telling me a story, if I set them down and start doing the dishes at the same time and I miss some details, they're not going to look at me and be like, are you listening? And yet I still get to hear their story about their day and how a raccoon, I don't know, I'm just making something up, like chased a squirrel around their yard. It could be something so mundane. Do you ever catch yourself watching some of this stuff on the internet and just thinking to yourself, like, why am I watching this? Just me? Okay. Definitely not. It's definitely not me. Like, we are in a day and age where we can connect with dozens of people in a few minutes. I can just scroll next. Or I can dive deep into a 2-hour YouTube video or a Twitch stream. Like, whether you are craving just like a quick combo or a deep heart to heart, it is available to you right now. And the best part, there's no follow-up texts, things you need to remember, right? You don't need to check in on the date they mentioned next week. You don't have any birthdays to track or milestones. There's no risk of forgetting an important detail and feeling like a bad friend. No obligation when they tell you that their kid's sick and they're completely overrun. You have no obligation to show up at their house with a meal. No guilt when you're too tired to actually ask them a question back. That detail that you missed while you were doing the dishes earlier, who cares? They're not going to quiz you on it. Like, when you're done hearing about their life, you just simply close the app. Or you move on to the next person, or you don't. Like, it's completely on your terms. And I mentioned this before with the roots, but something we're not talking about enough is that these relationships are taking up mental space. Think about it. You might know this person's coffee order, their morning routine, their kids' names, their relationship drama, their home layout, their favorite restaurants, their daily schedule. Like, those are those roots that I'm mentioning in episode 12. And if I really start to think about it, sometimes I think I know more details about these people online that I've never met than I do some of my oldest friends. Like, I may not know if my college bestie loves the same candy she did years ago because I just haven't had that many days I've spent with her, and I guess I haven't specifically asked, and we've talked on the phone. But I can tell you exactly what that influencer I follow orders at Starbucks. And that's wild because we're not just carrying these people's personal information. Like, if you're having parasocial relationships with people, you're carrying a whole archive. If you've been following them long enough, you know their old apartments, their previous jobs. That is mental real estate that we are giving away to people who don't even know our names. And it's not just about the mental space they occupy, but it's also about how they're actively reshaping our expectations of real world friendships. So we've talked about how easy these parasocial relationships are, and now let's talk about something more subtle, which is how they're actually changing what we expect from our real friends. So I want to think about it for a second. We are constantly consuming perfectly edited, I have air quotes up, authentic moments. Beautifully curated, quote unquote, messy spaces. Carefully filmed, quote unquote, spontaneous interactions. Strategically shared, vulnerable conversations. And even though we know that it is, I want to say, often curated, I think that can seep into our expectations outside of our screens. So let's break down where some of those expectations might be, right? One of them could be in our homes. I talk about this in episode 91, how to stop dreading parties and take charge of your guest experience. I did a whole rant on this. But when you go to your friends' houses and you visit them, do you ever compare them to the houses you see online? You're like, oh, well, those people, that person I follow, that YouTuber, that whatever, right? It's that like lived in space that we see online, but it's like, is it really lived in? Because guys, I record things and I've actually had people message me like, your mirror's dirty and I love that. Or it's so you that there's clothes on that chair behind you. But that was a conscious choice to leave that there. Often, not always, right? But I do see the things that are around me in the video. And there's sometimes I'm like, oh, that looks really gross. Like I got to clean that up before. Or people are choosing to leave the dirty dishes in the sink, but that is still a choice. And then we show up at our friends' houses and we're probably comparing what we see online in some way, shape, or form to what might be happening in our friends' houses. And on the flip side, if you're like, I don't do that, I love that. But on the flip side, and what I talk about in episode 91 is we do it to ourselves. The number of people who tell me like, oh, well, I don't want to have people over because my house isn't nice, because it's dirty, because I'd have to clean it up, because this, that, whatever. We are doing it to ourselves. And because we have these expectations, we're holding back from actually letting our real friends come hang out at our house. Another expectation shift is this kind of availability expectation, right? We are used to having pretty round-the-clock access to some of these parasocial connections. So when real friends take a few hours or days to respond to text, sometimes we can feel like that really hits different, right? We're like, why aren't they responding? Why aren't they messaging back? What's happening? We are used to this immediate access, immediate response, immediate connection. Sometimes I also think people might have some expectations around sharing. Like we expect our friends to be as open and vulnerable as our favorite creators that we follow. Forgetting that these creators are choosing what they share, editing out parts that don't feel right to them, sometimes getting paid to share, and at the end of the day, building a brand through their willingness to share stories about their lives. Okay, so now that I've talked about just a few of these expectations we might have, let's get into a real kicker here and let's talk about time. I've read newsletters about this. I don't know if I've talked about it in the podcast, but when you start doing the math, man, does it feel eye-opening. Because if you are spending 30 minutes a day with your favorite creator, that favorite parasocial relationship of yours, or maybe an hour scrolling through feeds, be honest with yourself. Does this number feel low or high? I don't know. Maybe you're spending 2 hours on YouTube hanging out for that dinner time chit chat with your favorite creator. Or there is a Twitch that you put on that's 3.5 hours every night after you get home. Now, if you did a combination of that 30 minutes a day, watching somebody's stories, an hour scrolling through feeds, and maybe 2 hours with that YouTube on, that is 3.5 hours daily, or about 24.5 hours weekly, or roughly 1,277 hours yearly. Now ask yourself, how many hours do you actually spend in conversations, whether that's on the phone, text message, in person, with your closest friends, or any friends for that matter, or community? Yeah, okay. And it's not just about the time spent consuming content, it's also just about the emotional energy. We're investing a significant emotional bandwidth in these one-sided relationships, and sometimes we don't have much left for the real ones. And the irony here is that we find ourselves complaining that our real friends aren't showing up for us. Well, we're giving hours and hours of our day to people who don't even know we exist. Now, I'm sure some of you are ready to throw your phones away, but before you think that I'm suggesting that we need to eliminate all these parasocial relationships, let's talk about why this whole situation is more complex than it even might seem at this point, because I don't have all the answers about parasocial relationships. That's not why I created this episode. I created this episode because I have questions, important ones, and questions that I need to ask myself, but I think you need to start asking yourself as well. We all need to start asking ourselves about parasocial relationships. So first, let's talk about that pull to open the app. You know, the one where your finger just finds its way there to that button. Everyone's quick to label it as just another dopamine addiction. But is it? Or is it something deeper? Because here's what I've noticed is that we can go weeks without checking in on a real friend, but we often feel this constant pull to check in on our parasocial connections. There are definitely people that I kind of assume will have something new for me to consume if I open the apps. They're that consistent. And why do I feel that pull? Why do you feel that pull? It's maybe because there is no risk of rejection. If I call them, they're not going to not pick up or not respond to a message. There's no awkward catch up. There's no explaining why I've been absent. And there's no guilt about the time that's passed. So that brings me this idea that maybe there is some piece of it that is that dopamine addiction, but maybe there's also a piece of it that is about comfort and ease and safety. And let's be really, really honest about why these connections are extra enticing. They require no relationship skills and no effort, right? I don't have to be good at conflict resolution. I don't have to have difficult conversations. I don't have to have that mental load of following up or checking in. I don't have to show up when things are hard. And I don't have to support someone through a crisis. I just get to watch as someone moves through their life. And in a world that feels really overwhelming, especially right now, like really overwhelming, I get it. I really do. I am also partaking. I've admitted that a million times in this episode. These are easy connections that feel like a relief. But here's what we're not thinking about is that we're investing hours and hours into relationships that can't show up for us when we're in a crisis. In other episodes, you've heard me talk about this idea of building yourself a web. These people that you are investing all this time in, they're not in your web as far as I understand it. Send me some examples otherwise. But we're banking emotional currency that we can never cash in. And maybe that's okay sometimes. But shouldn't we at least be conscious of that trade-off? Moving on, here is another question that keeps me up at night. How are these parasocial relationships shaping our world view? Right? We've all heard that saying about how we are the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with, right? Well, who are your 5 people? Like, really think about it. Are they actual friends that you see regularly? Are they podcasters you listen to daily? Are they influencers whose lives you follow? Are they streamers that you watch for hours? Because here's the thing. You're absorbing their political views, life philosophies, personal values, decision-making processes, all through carefully curated snippets or highly edited longer content. Don't turn me off yet. We got to keep going. Let's go deeper. What about authenticity in friendships? I hear people say things like, I want friends who really get me. Or reciprocity is so important to me in a friendship. I have people who DM me and message me and email me and voice memo me about how their friends never show up for them. And yet, we might be investing dozens of hours into relationships where there is zero reciprocity, the person doesn't know we exist, and they literally cannot show up for us because they don't know who we are. Do you see the disconnect here? It just blows my mind. And here's where it gets really interesting and important is that sometimes these parasocial relationships serve a vital purpose, right? I mentioned this before, like maybe you're an LGBTQ person in a place where you can't safely be out, or you are dealing with an illness that none of your local friends understand. You're the only person in your circle trying to make a really, really, really big, major life change. Or at least that's how it feels to you. Maybe you are somebody with limited mobility who can't easily meet people in person. In these cases, parasocial connections might be literal lifelines. And if that's you, then I want you to pat yourself on the back for seeking out those connections. Don't listen to the dopamine addiction talk. Don't feel bad for opening that app. Find the connection you need. Another talk we got to have, another question we got to have is we got to talk about something that so many people are seeking, that's very important, that I talk about, which is this idea of community and belonging. We are living in a world where traditional third places, those spaces between home and work where community naturally forms, are disappearing. I have 2 episodes about this, episode 38 and 39, where I talk about the loss of third places. Coffee shops are full of people on their laptops. Community centers are closing. Even religious spaces are seeing declines in attendance. So where do we go to find our people? The internet. I have endless episodes about meeting new people and how you can use the internet as a tool. And honestly, I get it, right? I'm suggesting it. I have done it. I have used it. I have told people to find communities, to connect with streamers, to find podcasts, to explore VR community spaces. I have an entire episode about using VR, right? Using social media to find local groups. Like, the internet has become our first resource in finding a sense of belonging. And sometimes that's exactly what we need. Like, it can be the bridge to find those real world, 2-way connections where both people know the other person. But I think some people get caught up at that bridge. They don't cross it. They set up and they camp on it. Another question we need to ask ourselves then is, how can you use these parasocial connections as a bridge to real community rather than a replacement for it? I don't have the answer to that. The quick answer probably is engagement. It's probably, even if maybe the influencer, the streamer, the podcaster, if it's like too big of a platform and they don't know who you are, actually connecting with some people in the comments, taking that into the DMs or a Zoom chat or a local meetup group or something like that. A few final questions I'm just going to rapid fire at you. Some things to sit with. How much mental space are these parasocial relationships actually occupying for you? Are they enhancing or replacing your real world connections? What is the actual ratio of time spent on parasocial versus real relationships? How have your parasocial relationships shifted your expectations of your friendships? Where are you finding your sense of belonging? What worldviews are you absorbing without realizing it? And maybe most importantly, what role do you want parasocial relationships to play in your life moving forward? Because here's the thing, parasocial relationships aren't going anywhere. So instead of judging them, maybe it's time that we got intentional about them. Look, here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Parasocial relationships aren't inherently good or bad. They're just part of our modern reality. And honestly, they're not going anywhere. So awareness is what is going to change everything. Like, maybe you've realized that you're investing more emotional energy in parasocial relationships than real ones. Maybe you listen to this episode and your expectations of friends, you're realizing, have been very shaped by the curated content that we are seeing. Maybe you're using these parasocial relationships as a substitute for community. Or maybe you've recognized that they are serving a vital purpose in your life right now. Whatever you've discovered listening to this episode, here's what I want you to do. First of all, get curious. Not judgmental, curious. Notice when you're reaching for these connections. Pay attention to what they are giving you. Are they filling a space that is very vital in your life right now? Consider what you might be missing in real-world relationships and think about how you want to balance both moving forward. And then after you've done this reflection and gotten curious, I want you to get intentional. Because parasocial relationships can be valuable tools. They can be the connection you feel like you're missing. They can be a bridge to real communities. They can be an opportunity to learn and grow, to feel less lonely. But at the end of the day, they don't replace the work of real connection. So remember that real connection isn't supposed to be easy, but it is supposed to be worth it. And while parasocial relationships might feel comfortable and safe and predictable, they can't give you what real connection can be. And I am not talking about like virtual versus in person. I want to be really clear about that. I'm doing a whole other episode about making friends online, like online friends, but that I'm talking about two-way friendship there, not parasocial, which are these one-way relationships. Parasocial can't give you what real human connection can. The chance to be truly known, truly seen, and truly supported. So maybe the question isn't, should I have these relationships, but rather, how can I make sure they're enhancing my life rather than replacing the connections that I really need? Now, I know I've given you a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts. This is one of those deeper episodes. That's why it's taken me a while to pull it together. And I'm going to walk away from this episode with just as much need for reflection and getting intentional as you are. But I would love to actually connect with any of you, right? Reach out, send me a message. There are so many of you that I do have a two-way banter with. And although I wouldn't recognize you necessarily if you walked up to me in the street, if you told me what your name is, those of you that I DM with, like I would know who you are. I would say some names, but I don't, like Steven or Sharon, or like there are definitely people that come to mind. So that's always an opportunity too. I'm always here. See you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @itsAlexAlexander. Or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.